So we are quickly approaching the time when this United States Supreme Court will come down with a ruling on the Mississippi case that can lead to the overturning of Roe versus Wade. Now, we all know, we all saw the leaked draft, that all implications point toward the overturning of Roe versus Wade, sending it back to the states and having the states decide whether to ban abortion or not. And we already know what a lot of these states are going to do. Okay? Now, while protests rage on, many women are comparing present day and not so far away future to a book written by Margaret Atwood called The Handmaid's Tale. Okay? Of course, many of those comparisons are coming from white women. Yeah. Now, before we jump into our discussion, I want to clarify something. Now, the book and the series, they're different. In casting for the series, they did a colorblind casting, which in theory means that if you are the best person for the role, regardless of your race, you will get that role. Okay? What that did to the series then is that it implied that women of color share the same experience as white women. This is a misrepresentation of the book. Okay? In the book, Gilead was predominantly white. If there were people of color, they were servants. Okay? In the book, people of color, specifically black people, were thrown in as an afterthought. Okay? Now, A Handmaid's Tale shows white women living under the same conditions that black women were and are living under. It's a reality where black women in the United States for hundreds of years lived during a period of time where their bodies were deemed not their own, and their children, the children they gave birth to, were deemed not their own. Black people, specifically black women, they are removed from the story to focus it on the perspective of a white woman. They took our history, they took our pain, they took our trauma, they took our lives, removed us from it, and placed all of that onto a white woman so you could see it through her eyes. And it's like I have said, anything having to do with women will always center on the perspective of a white woman. Don't believe me? Let's get into some examples, shall we? Let's talk about some of the roles of the women. Let's start with the handmaids. Okay, the handmaids are forced to sleep with the commanders to produce children. Okay, because there was a diminish in the population had diminished. Okay, what was not clearly identified, but what we all know is that the population that was diminishing was the white population. Okay, so to rebuild, we've got this entire society where a large part of it is centered around reproducing children. So you've taken these women who have proven that they can give birth and you force them into servitude. Okay? Now, I want you to remember our previous discussions, specifically the stereotype of Jezebel. Okay? Those black women were forced to sleep with whomever to get pregnant and create more slaves. And they did this because the enslavers needed more slaves. And the cheapest way to go about that is to force black women to sleep with whomever. Do you see the correlation? Do you see the correlation of the future of white women being forced to breed while the past of black women is being forced to breed? Or that the handmaids have taken on the name of the commander. The example being June. In the book, she's Offred of Fred. Just like black women, when they were enslaved, they took on the name of the enslaver. My last name is the last name of the enslaver who had my ancestors enslaved. Let's talk about Jezebels. Jezebels in the series and in the book, they're forced to become prostitutes. They're forced to become entertainers. Right? Um, and this, they didn't even try to hide it this time. Because again, looking at the stereotype of Jezebel, Jezebel is a stereotype applied to black women that says that we are innately sexual, that we are innately promiscuous, that we are innately sexually voracious, which justifies the sexual exploitation of black women and girls. These women in the book who are forced into prostitution, forced to become entertainers, their role justifies the sexual exploitation of them. Let's talk about the wives of the commanders. The wives of the commanders who willfully ignore their surroundings and the atrocities that are occurring. And in many instances, they are perpetuating the atrocities because it benefits them, just like the wives of enslavers. And in some cases, the wives owned slaves. And we don't even want to get into the fact that Offred continuously uses black people to her own end, and it resulting in the death of that black person. The example being of Matthew. Right? And this is not unlike today. White women using black women to their own ends, often ending in the detriment of black women. Black women have gone through trauma, collective trauma, but it was taken from us. We were stripped of the narrative, only for that narrative to be placed onto the life of a white woman so that it could be seen through her perspective. And once seen through her perspective, now there's sympathy. Now there's empathy. Now there is horror. But when it was us, it was ignored. When it was us, it was, I don't believe you. I'm sure it wasn't all that bad. But now that it's you, now you want to do something about it. I want you to understand what you are saying when you compare the present and possible future to The Handmaid's Tale. You are saying that you are afraid of living the life of a black woman. You are afraid of experiencing the trauma of a black woman. You cannot possibly see yourselves living the life of a black woman. Now, this part is just my opinion. I find it offensive. I find it tone deaf and I find it offensive. Partly because of what we have discussed, and partly because you've completely ignored what it means for us. Because if you think it's bad for you, trust and believe it'll be worse for us.